It says we're live. There we go. You guys can actually see me. All right, so we are trying this dual live thing. I don't know how it will go, so we will just roll with it. I normally go live on TikTok, which I've got over here, and then I am live on YouTube as well too. But feel free to drop any questions in either of the chats, and I will try to watch them and update as we go. I decided to go live because I tried to make a post to update everybody on everything that has been going on and kind of where I'm currently sitting with health updates, as well as kind of the procedure that I have coming at the end of the month. But it was really long and complicated to try to update. And then the one post that I did try to update, I tried to update on two different posts, and like I've gotten conflicting responses where I feel like it just confused people more. So I thought it'd be a lot easier to just share through live here. So the one thing that I always like to do when we get started is ask where everybody's from. So feel free to drop in the comments where you're from as we wait for folks to join here. And I'm going to grab a blanket because I want to get comfy. So we will get into storytelling mode here. Southern California, nice. Texas, Magnolia, Ottawa, Canada. Nice. We got folks from all over. Tucson. I just turned on my heater. I don't want my heater on. Florida. What's the shruggy face? You don't know if you're in Florida? Wisconsin, North Carolina, Minnesota. We are headed to the NIH next week. You were there, right? Yes, I was there. I actually will be in the DC area next week as well for a couple days, but I won't be at the NIH. So I was at the NIH. So I guess that's a good way to kick off here. So I was actually at the NIH last week. I flew in last Sunday, not this last Sunday, but the Sunday before that. I flew in to kind of have an additional appointment. And then I had a scope of my bladder scheduled for Wednesday, which was exactly a week ago from today. And we scheduled the bladder scope. So if folks are not caught up on kind of my diagnostic history, we'll give a quick snapshot here. So diagnosed stage 4 cancer coming up on 3 years ago. Ended up getting to a surgery that kind of drastically changed my prognosis about 6 months in, which led me to kind of where I am today, where I have been off all systemic treatments for over 2 years, and we've just been watching me. So where some other people might be on medication due to the rarity of the type of cancer I had, I haven't been on any medication, and I've just been on active surveillance. So we've been scanning me. First, it was every 3 months. Then it went to every 4 months. My last scan was every 5 months. And then this next set is at 6 months, I think, question mark. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out my scheduling for my scans. But so everything has been looking good on the kidney cancer front. And so I thought I'd clarify that because anytime I mention any kind of bad news, everybody always thinks kidney cancer, which makes sense, right? Like that's the most common thing that's going to go wrong with me. And so I think that's what was confusing a lot of people in my post. So what's in my bladder, we don't really know what it is. It's been called a polyp. It's been called a growth. Polyps in your bladder aren't common. Like you might get polyps in your colon that are typically benign or precancerous, and you just remove them and they're fine. Polyps in your bladder or growths in your bladder are a bit more rare. Growths in your bladder typically end up being bladder cancer. But we don't think mine looks like bladder cancer typically looks like. Kind of basic way to describe the most common type of bladder cancer. When I was looking this up, I think it looks like a fern. So it kind of looks like this little growth that like just blows around in your bladder and kind of looks like a fern. Mine does not look like that. But the problem with mine is that it's grown in a less than ideal location. Basically, I only have one kidney since we removed my right kidney and this massive tumor. This is actually a 3D replica of my tumor that was printed by a very dear friend of mine that has since passed. But so we removed my right kidney and I only have my left kidney left. And so this little nodule or whatever you want to call it decided to grow in a pretty problematic location. Your bladder looks really big when you go in there with a scope. Like there's all this room around in there, and this little nub thing grew directly from where my left kidney drains. There's a ureter, is what it's called when your kidney kind of drains into your bladder. And there's a little opening where your kidney drains into your bladder. And that is exactly where this thing is. So it's like kind of growing on the side of it here. And then it's like this little nub that like kind of folds over. And so like it can kind of move to let urine still go into my bladder. And so my kidney doesn't get super backed up. But it is obviously in a problematic location. Because if that grows, it could threaten blocking drainage to my kidney. But there were also risks for removing it. And there's a little bit higher risk for me than there is for most people. One, because I only have one kidney, so obviously that's a risk. But the other risk is also because I have a bleeding disorder, which complicates pretty much anything that I do. My surgery that I had where we operated on my liver and my kidney was pretty risky due to the fact that I had a bleeding disorder as well. But we managed that safely. We've done ablations in my liver, which we managed safely at the NIH. And so I'm hoping we'll be able to do the same with this, which is also why I decided to get this done at the NIH, is because they already know how to manage my bleeding disorder. They know the right medications and everything to give me. So there's some risk with bleeding from removing that. And then the other risk is there was a risk of scarring. So because of where it's at, there was a risk of like that opening could, while it was healing, could scar over and close the opening. And that could cause damage to my kidney as well too. And so we obviously don't want that to happen either. It's been weird to talk about this thing because I shared so much about my diagnosis, like as it was happening, as I was getting diagnosed. And I shared like every step of the way. And I've shared some with this. I've kind of let people know that I had a polyp in my bladder and that we've been watching it, but I haven't shared it nearly as much. And a lot of that is because I don't have answers. And the more people that I share with, I notice the more people get confused by kind of my medical situation in general. And so I didn't want to confuse people. I didn't really want people to be super worried. When I found this in March, it kind of sucked. It kind of felt like, okay, here we go again. Didn't exactly know what it was when we found it. It was, I had had a little bit of blood in my urine that I had seen, and I had never seen blood in my urine before. It's not something that I had seen, like even when I had kidney cancer. And so I second guessed myself a whole lot and thought I was making a fuss over nothing when I notified my doctors. Because I don't know, I was just worried that like this was all in my head because it only happened like once and then I didn't see it again. And so I wasn't sure that I should notify them, but I'm glad I did, because I ended up getting a scope done locally here in Austin, which was the first scope that I had of my bladder, which is where we found this thing the first time. And at that time, it kind of like stood up a little bit, and then it would like fold over and we'd take a picture of it. But it seemed a little bit more mobile. But I got super worried after that because like we had no idea how long this thing had been there, and didn't really know what it was. It didn't look like papillary bladder cancer, which like kind of looks like a fern. And so we were hoping that it was maybe just something benign, or we weren't really sure what it was, or it could have even been possibly just kind of my normal anatomy. So I was super nervous because I was going like out of the country on a trip in April, and I got a bit worried about this thing. So that period of time was a little bit stressful. But the name of the game with pretty much anything in my case is just waiting it out And so it's kind of just doing another active surveillance, and we did another scope in May. I had that scope done at MD Anderson because the local urologist that did the scope for me here in Austin recommended that it was removed or I had a biopsy of it, but they didn't want to do that locally because of like my case is already managed by MD Anderson and the NIH. And so I ended up going to MD Anderson and having a scope done there, where I wasn't super comfortable with the surveillance plan. They too also weren't sure what it is. And there's actually like one phrasing that stands out in my mind, particularly from that appointment. And that's because I was having a conversation with the physician who would have been removing the polyp. And as I was talking to him, we were discussing about what the possibilities of what this thing might be is. And he referred to bladder polyps as that he didn't think it was super likely to be a bladder polyp because bladder polyps were exceedingly rare. And that word will like forever stand out to me just because that is what was listed in my pathology report. The type of kidney cancer I have is called a metastatic oncocytoma. Oncocytomas are typically known to be benign. They like never ever spread. Mine is the one that like did not catch that memo. There's single digit case reports. And so hearing exceedingly rare, of course, just like as a patient who has been that patient that has had exceedingly rare things, it's not rational whatsoever. But of course, that triggers like, great, cool. Glad we just signed me up for that. Although if this was a polyp and benign, I would take that. I would like something to actually be benign in my body and like actually stick to being benign and not cancerous. That'd be nice. So that is kind of where it stood at MD Anderson. We didn't really know what it was, but it didn't really look like cancer. And so the plan was just to watch for swelling of my kidney originally in my surveillance scans, which my surveillance scans had been bumped to every 6 months. And so I wasn't really comfortable with that because that felt like we were kind of like waiting to intervene until there was already damage being done. So I pushed back a little bit, and then we discussed possibilities of doing another scope, I think 6 months later. And then when I pushed back a little bit further again, because that felt like a long time, we discussed like maybe it could be possible to remove it. But in that same period of time, I was already had my next surveillance scans on my kidney cancer at the NIH, which was at the end of June. That was like the 2-year anniversary of my surgery. And so I went up there to get my surveillance scans. And as I was talking them through my appointments, I also shared with them that I had this bladder polyp and what the recommendations were for surveillance. And they wanted me to keep a little bit closer of an eye on it. So I ended up getting a second opinion through the NIH and kind of their bladder specialist there. And I just did a consultation while I was there. And then I went back in the beginning of August to do another scope, which would have been 3 months from the last one that I had. And during that scope, he didn't think that it had grown. But the important part of this is where my care, I don't know, it's for better or for worse. I have been very, very fortunate with where I am and where I'm at in my care. And a lot of people have played a hand in that. But it also makes my case very complicated and makes it much easier for things to be missed when you are seen by lots of different providers. So for example, if I had just had this thing scoped by the urologist here in Austin, these 2 other scopes would have been done by the same person. So it's the same person seeing this spot over and over again, so they can kind of get a feel for if it's changing or not. Whereas anytime I went somewhere else, like you're relying on pictures to kind of guess and estimate kind of based on what it looks like currently. And so this third scope was from the surgeon at the NIH who would do the removal from my bladder if I chose to get it done there. And so that was their first time seeing it, but they didn't think that it had grown from the pictures that were taken at MD Anderson, to me, it looked a little bit less mobile still, but it looked relatively close. So we decided to do just surveillance again. Part of that was also because I was starting a new job, and so was my husband. And so we had some complications around like trying to figure out how we were going to coordinate insurance. I was working for a startup at the time, and didn't think that I would qualify for Cobra. Thankfully, Texas kind of has a fallback plan for companies that aren't large enough to qualify for Cobra. So I would have had insurance, but I didn't know that at the time. And so it was quite a stressful process to try to figure out. And so we decided to continue on with surveillance. And so that is what I was doing back at the NIH last week, is I was going back for a scope to check on that spot. And so it's actually really interesting to see the different levels of like intensity for the same procedure. If you ask me, the best pictures came from the local urologist office that I had. They like, you did the scope just like in a room, one room over, and it was pretty informal, super laid back. But I personally feel like that had the best images of it. So that was like level one of like not super formal. And then going to MD Anderson, like kind of stepped things up a little bit. There was a lot more prep that went into it. They did like a little huddle to check in to make sure everybody was on the same page before they did the procedure. And then at the NIH, it's like an entire level above that. It feels a little bit over the top for like a scope specifically, because you go back to the pre-op area, which the first time I went was very weird, because the last time I was there was when I was going for surgery. And so that kind of messed with my emotions at the time. Like it was such a weird place, being in such a different place, but for something that felt a lot less serious, obviously. Yeah, it was a very interesting thing. So they take you back to like a pre-op area. You get all like in the gown, you get all hooked up to the machines and whatnot. And then they actually take you into the OR to do the scope, which was also really weird because like you're picturing the fact that, okay, the last time I was in the OR was when somebody was like cutting into me. But of course, I didn't remember any of that. And so it was like very interesting to look around the room and see what it looked like in there. So this procedure was the same thing, like went to the pre-op area and then went back to the OR for the scope. And then that is when we did the scope. And when you do a scope of your bladder, there's like a little screen that you can watch on as they're kind of looking and navigating around your bladder. And so you can see it the whole time. And so this time I saw it again. I didn't feel like it looked like it changed that much, but it's really kind of hard to tell when things are pretty subtle. Like maybe I could kind of see like it didn't seem like the opening was opening as much anymore, which is important. But obviously, I'm not trained in any of this stuff. It's just seeing what it looks like to me. But when the physician saw it, the surgeon saw it, he said that he thought that it had grown and it looked like it had grown to him. So it was time to come out. And that was such a interesting experience. One, I'm just a nervous Nelly in general. I've gotten way better compared to like surgery. Surgery was a nightmare. I was ridiculously nervous. I also wonder, I've always wondered like how much of that like had to do with symptoms that I was dealing with from the tumor, like having a really high heart rate and high blood pressure. And like, I felt different before the tumor was actually removed. And I've always wondered how much of that was like the tumor causing those things versus how much was like, is the different in mindset, like desensitization to all of that, because I've been through it so many times. I don't know, who knows? But so like in the pre-op area, I was joking around with all the nurses. Like we were talking about their cool pens that they got. I don't know, it was pretty casual. But then back as soon as I heard the news, like obviously like that kind of felt a little bit like a gut punch because the last scope that we did, it kind of looked like it was just part of my normal anatomy. And that's part of why they, I think, don't think that it looks like cancer, is because, again, it doesn't look like typical bladder cancer normally looks like. But also, it like kind of looks like the lining of my bladder, like an extension of that, like a little nub off of that. And so last time, it kind of looked like it blended in a little bit better when the opening opened. And so I was hopeful that like maybe we didn't need to intervene with this thing. If there's one thing that I have learned the most when it comes to kind of treatment, especially in my case, is that sometimes less is more. I have a few spots that we have been watching in my liver for about 2.5 years since my surgery. The spots have been there since I was initially diagnosed, and they haven't grown at all. And so, like watching those has prevented us from having any intervention. It's also what like prevented me from having an NED diagnosis for the first like year and a half or so. But because we were just watching them. Now they start labeling those as they don't think it's suspicious for metastatic disease, whereas like in my earlier reports, they mentioned it suspicious as metastatic disease. But since they've been there so long and they haven't grown, they're really not causing me any problems. And so obviously you can have problems when you intervene with things. I had a bleed during my biopsy. If TikTok is shaking, that's my cat down here who's not very happy. And so I was kind of hopeful that like, all right, maybe this thing is just my normal anatomy. We have no idea how long it has been in there. So maybe it's been in there a long time and not been causing any problems. Hopefully we don't ever have to intervene with it. Like that would be best case scenario. So getting that news kind of sucked to hear that we would end up having to go through surgery for it. And so did we all just watch that? Hi, Mocha. This is Mocha, if anybody was wondering. She apparently is very upset. I think she's locked in here. That was fun. Way to lighten the mood, Mokes. Yeah, anyways. So getting that news was kind of like a letdown, obviously, because I was hoping not to have to intervene. And it was also a combination of like life has been like really good lately. I started a new job. I'm absolutely loving my new job. I've been doing a lot of stuff for advocacy, and yeah, just life has been going really well. And I really did not want to disrupt it again because there's so much that goes into play with all of these things that it gets pretty stressful. So I was trying to process that news, and it was very interesting because most of the time when I've received bad news, I'm trying to think of all the times I've received bad news. So obviously my initial diagnosis, like somebody came in the room to deliver that. And you're like, so now that I think of it, I had a very similar reaction to that. So when I first got diagnosed in the ER, like the very first emotion I felt was relief, which was like really weird to feel, but I'd been feeling off for a long time and couldn't get anybody to take me seriously. So the fact that we actually had answers to why I was feeling off, I felt a bit of relief first. But then once the shock set in, I was embarrassed. I don't like to cry in front of people. I especially don't like to cry in front of people who are like the ones giving me bad news. And so the heart rate monitor and my blood pressure just like skyrocketed when I got diagnosed in the ER. And the exact same thing happened last week as I was like in the OR for the scope because I was hooked up to a heart rate monitor. And so in the moment, like, okay, told that this thing needs to come out. And so my mind immediately goes to a million places of like, okay, when does this need to come out? How am I going to schedule it around everything? The holidays are coming up. What do I need to know? Last time we talked about this, it was questions around, are we going to stent the opening, which is like they put something in to like hold the opening open while it heals so that it doesn't collapse on itself. But that could be kind of uncomfortable. It can also like cause some agitation, which could possibly cause some bleeding, which I already have risks for. And so there's pros and cons of stenting versus not stenting, as well as like causing like seeding further up. So I was trying to like be in the moment and get all of those questions in because I knew this was the time to answer any questions. The last time I had this done, like I had the scope. I had walking back to the little post-op area to like get any questions in, and then that was it. That's all the questions I can ask unless I want to play a telephone game through like 17 emails and 5 people. Um, and so I was trying to figure out like, okay, what questions do I need to ask? And so I was trying to ask like, does it look like it's really grown that much? And also was asking around like, do we think we're gonna have to stent it? Does it change how it's going to be removed? How long should I be planning to stay? That's like my number one question that I always want to get answered and is the hardest question to get answered. And so I was trying to get it answered at the source because that answer depends on things like, are we going to stent the area? As well as like how long does hematology, who watches me when I'm at the NIH, how long do they want me to stay? And so, unless I get those answers from the doctor while I'm in the appointment, that means it's going to take me like a week or two to get those answers elsewhere. Which, when you're trying to plan things, like for example, we've got a plan to fly, like probably my mom or somebody down to take care of the pets while we're gone. I've got to book flights. I've got to book hotel rooms. I got to know how long I'm going to stay. And the further that gets out, especially hotel rooms, they get ridiculously expensive. And so if I don't get those questions answered right in the moment in the OR, then it's going to be like a week or two and it's going to be super stressful. So I was simultaneously like trying to process the news of like, crap, here we go again. I've got something else that I've got to deal with. Trying to ask all of those questions, as well as like that's where the heart rate monitor was like tattling on me is because so I instantly went from like trying to process like getting bad news in the first place immediately resurfaces the like news any other time I've gotten bad news. Like when I found out there were still spots left behind in my liver after surgery, or when I was initially diagnosed. And so there's like this immediate like trauma that's already trying to resurface. And so my voice was shaky. And so I actually remember like taking a really deep breath and trying to like hold as still as possible so that I could like get out my question without my voice quivering, which totally quivered at the beginning. But then I was like, cool, nobody knows how nervous I am. Until the heart rate monitor was just going off like crazy, very much indicating the fact that I was very nervous. So it tattletailed on me, and nobody believed me that I wasn't nervous. But so pretty much just tried to ask all the questions that I could in that. And then they took me back to the like post-op area where they just like as if you got like an invasive procedure, they do like blood pressure readings and everything and keep you there for a little while. And I actually did really good while I was in the OR and like through the scope. Like again, I was like trying my hardest not to like let the emotions come over me. Um, and then like when they wheeled me back into the post-op areas, like we're getting everything ready to check out. That's when everything hit me. And I was really, really trying hard not to cry. And I'm probably gonna cry even talking about trying hard not to cry. Yep, this is definitely gonna happen. Um, because it was like the processing of like so many emotions at once. Like one, it's like trying to figure out like, ugh, now I've got these million other things I've got to plan. And um, nope, dang it. We will never get through a live without me crying. Um, it was also part of like, so there's so much that happens in November and December, right? So you've got the holidays. I've got a lot of stuff that I'm doing for advocacy stuff. Um, got a lot of stuff at work that I'm excited about. And then my husband's birthday is coming up. I also had I was going to be able to drive some supercars through Sedona, which was going to be like a super cool bucket list experience thing. But I'm going to have to reschedule that now. And so, like, there's this immediate like feeling of like when nope, we're not. When I first started kind of getting back to life and started to kind of plan things again more than 3 months at a time, I was really scared to start doing that. And a big part of that was because this is where we're getting emotional. Um, whew. The feeling of having the rug ripped out from under you is by far uh, one of the worst experiences and was probably the hardest part of getting diagnosed with cancer for me. Um, I had just gotten married when I initially got diagnosed, coming up on 3 years ago. And I had just gone from like planning out the next 50 years with my husband, right? Like we were gonna grow old, have kids, build this beautiful house. Um, and I had all these plans. And like one of the worst parts, like beyond just the fear of death, one of the worst parts of like getting a cancer diagnosis was like having all that ripped out from under you. And like all of a sudden you're at zero. You can't make any plans. You don't know how to plan anything. Um, and that was really hard to process. And so like I put off getting back to life and only allowed myself to think in 3-month increments because I didn't want to ever have that feeling again. It's like a terrible feeling. And so when I was sitting there in the post-op area, a lot of it was that, right? Like it was like this feeling of like, oh man, I knew I shouldn't have planned things because this is what happens. Like my health pretty much controls my life these days. Um, and so there's a little bit of like poor pity me, feel bad for me kind of stuff that I was trying to process, as well as like the simultaneous guilt of like even having those feelings because of how minor this feels in comparison to what I've been through. Um, there's like conflicting feelings there too. One, because we don't know what this is. And so that brings up a whole lot of past trauma for me because for 6 months, leading all the way up to surgery, I don't know is like the number one phrase that I heard everywhere that I went. Nobody knew really anything about my case. And so, like, living in a world of uncertainty kind of just sucks. And so, living in a world where, again, I have this thing, we don't know what it is, be pretty rare for it to be related to the kidney cancer, but like, not impossible. I've been in a super rare scenario before, which should make this even more rare, but when you're emotional, the mind does not process those things that way. Also just like grappling the fact, like, could this be bladder cancer? And do I have to go through figuring out navigating the entire world of what having bladder cancer is like? Or could this thing just be benign? um, as well as like also trying to process the fact that, okay, regardless, we have to intervene. And hopefully this is like super simple and it's a whole bunch of like fuss for nothing. But there's also the risks of like things could happen, like having a bleeding disorder and like there is risk to damage to my kidney. I mean, it's low risk, so hopefully those things would never happen. But all those things do come in and like pile in, like when you get that news and are processing through everything. So the emotions were hitting me in that moment, and I felt bad for like feeling emotional because it wasn't about the fact that like, okay, if I like abstracted myself from the situation, why I always feel bad in those moments is I think like any physician or like I don't feel like nurses feel this way. I never get this vibe from nurses, but like any physicians or yeah, I don't even get that feeling from med students. So I'll just stick with physicians. It always feels like they have the context to know the risk level of something a lot better than a patient does. And like they only see things in the bubble of that risk level. And so, um, or that's how it feels like sometimes. And so it can feel like I recognize the fact that all of these emotions that I'm having are ridiculous in the context of like, this is my risk window and it's small and it's nothing compared to what I have been through before. Um, and so I felt guilty and like felt ridiculous for being upset. When the reason why I was upset was, yes, has to do with the fact that I really didn't want another surgery, but also has to do with the fact that there's a whole bunch of baggage that is coming behind as if this is like a past relationship that I'm rolling into. Um, and so like I felt very kind of embarrassed by the fact that I was crying. And like I also knew that I since I've been at this for about 3 years, like, I know myself pretty well and know how I process things. Like, I let things hit me and I'm going to be emotional. I'm gonna feel all of it for, like, a brief period of time, and it's gonna get ugly. Like, it's gonna be very emotional. But then it's gonna be over and I'm gonna be fine. Like, once I get that over and out, then I can, like, think about the things that I'm grateful for and just move on, which is what I did. Um, Even just the next day. And I think that emotion range in itself really confuses people, because they expect, like, they see a picture of me upset, um, and they think that, like, I'm going to stay that way. And I really, really appreciate everybody's support through all of that. But also, like, I know myself and that, like, I can rebound pretty quickly from some of these things, and focus on kind of like I can't change the situation, so I'm just going to focus on the positive things about it. And so I notice I tend to like throw people off, and I get the vibe from other people. They're like, "Okay, was she upset? Is she faking it now? Like, is this a we need to watch her a little bit closer because she seems a little too happy now?" Um, but it's a really weird like that is just how I process emotions now. I've lost many friends. There we go again. Um, from cancer at this point. Yep. And so if I like all of those moments like wrecked me. I was destroyed for like a day or two and puffy eyes, the whole shebang. Um, but then I've found ways to like honor them or think about them in really positive lights. And there's just been so much like heaviness, I guess, that I have had to process over the last 3 years that I feel like I've done a pretty good job at learning like how to cope with those things and finding ways that work for me of okay, I take the time to feel the emotion and get through it, and then I can find ways to move on past it. And so I thought I'd share some of that part because I do feel like I really do appreciate everybody's concern and it really does mean a lot to me, but I also recognize that I probably confuse the hell out of you guys because I'll post a picture of me crying because that was like very genuine in the moment. I was very upset. But then afterwards, like the next day, I'm happy as a bee. Um, as I was like walking through, and I'll tell that story a little bit too, but like I walked through the like most beautiful park I have ever seen the next day and had one of those moments of like, wow, cool. Yesterday really sucked, but I would not have had this moment if yesterday didn't suck. So I was really grateful for that moment. And so those wide swing of emotions are like pretty normal for me these days. Um, and I kind of just roll with it. Um, yeah. So, all right, back to the news of getting the news of. So I got the news, and as I was crying, like I knew this, right? Like I knew I have this like threshold of like I got to get it out. Once I feel it, I can acknowledge the fact that I felt it and then I'll be done with it. But I didn't have time to process. Like I went straight to the OR and then I'm immediately in the post-op area and there's like people all around. And so like I felt like I couldn't cry. I was embarrassed because I started crying. And then of course when somebody notices you crying, you cry 10 times harder. And so I really, really appreciated the nurse and the medical student actually. They are the two people that I recognize the most. Um, I saw the physician kind of in the background as he like kind of went off and did his own thing again. And then the fellow had to come back to like check me out of the computer system. And I could tell that like it felt like the emotions were making them uncomfortable. But the nurse and the med student were like super attentive. And they really meant a lot to me because I was like over there apologizing because I'm like, I'm so sorry. Like, no, I'm fine. Like, this really isn't that big of a deal. I should not be crying right now. And so I was just like, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm sorry. And the nurse was like, you better stop apologizing. Like, this is hard. You got news that sucked. Like, please cry. Like, definitely, you're totally fine for crying. And she was trying to like validate my tears more than I was. But I really appreciated that in her. And then, like, I still just kept apologizing for crying. And she just kept telling me to stop. And she's like, "You can curse. Please curse. Like, you should curse." um, she was like just she was trying to cheer me up, but she was also like trying to find a way to like actually get me to process my emotions, which I really appreciated. So she meant a lot to me. And then also there was a med student that like I love med students. Med students and fellows are actually my favorite people on any team. Um, just interesting. Like I may not necessarily want them to be doing the advanced procedures, but they are my favorite people to talk to because they're so curious and they like ask good questions, and I can tell they're very attentive. And this med student originally, when I was in the pre-op area, she was kind of like standing in the corner, and I could tell she was kind of trying to stay out of everybody's way. But then she like came over and started talking to us, which I appreciated. And then after in the post-op area, when everybody else had like gone on and she could have gone with them, she noticed I was upset. And I'm gonna cry because when people are nice to me, it makes me cry. See, this just happens all the time. I make everybody uncomfortable with my tears. Um, and so she like stood at the edge of the bed and she like noticed that I was crying and she's like, "Are you okay?" Because I think she was just making sure that I was like physically okay. And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, I'm fine. I'm sorry. Like this is a lot. I shouldn't be crying. I'm sorry." And she was doing the same thing that the nurse was doing of like, "No, please cry," and kind of trying to validate my tears. And then she asked me a few questions. And then when she asked a question of like if I was here alone, because Brian just started a new job recently too. And we tried to save our PTO because of stuff like this. You never know when we are going to need it, and we are going to need his PTO. And so he tends to stay back while I go for appointments, unless I have like a major procedure or surgery or something that I need him there for, so that he can stay and take care of our pets. And so when she found out that I was alone, like then she like put her hand on the edge of the bed and she like made an intentional effort. Like she shifted her body language of like, "Nope, I'm not going anywhere." Um, and then like was talking me through it and was like, "It's okay. You can cry. You've been through a lot." Um, and then she told me an experience that she had that was personal to her that meant a lot to me, that she like shared that moment and experience. And she kind of just stood there like just to comfort me. And um yeah, I don't know, that was like very striking to me and really meant a lot to me. And whenever I have those moments, like I always want to go find those people later because I would love to tell her that like I think she's going to make a phenomenal doctor. And like those little moments of compassion really really do mean a lot. um so yeah, basically that is what that experience was like in the post-op area. Finally, they checked me out, and then I had about 3 hours that I had to kill between when that was over and when I needed to catch a ride to the airport. And so this entire time I was around other people, I was really uncomfortable and didn't want to cry around other people. And so as I left, like all those emotions hit me again because I was like by myself for a split second. And then suddenly it was like surrounded by people all of the time again. And so then my eyes are bloodshot, like I'm crying and like I'm trying not to look anybody in the eyes and trying to find a quiet place to like go cry. Um, and I couldn't find anywhere because there was people everywhere. So like I tried to go off to like one corner. Then a whole group of people came over to that area. I tried to go up to like the chapel area that I thought might be empty, but there was even more people up there. Um, and it was one of those moments that I realized like how difficult it was, one, to be processing that news by myself. Like anytime I've had to process bad news with Brian, like he just shields me, right? Like he just like gives me a hug. I just cry into his shirt and it feels like there's not a million people staring at me crying. But I didn't have him there for that moment. And so it was a very Like, it was the first time that I realized how difficult it is to have those moments when traveling, and traveling to the NIH specifically, because it's not like I had a car. Like, getting bad news at MD Anderson, like, I could just go down in my car and cry. Like, I'm in a parking garage. Nobody's gonna, like, maybe 2 people might walk by. Like, it's not a big deal. And then I have, like, an entire drive home to, like, be by myself or think about things. Um, but at the NIH, I don't have those things. I don't have a car. I'm going to have to get into a car with other people in order to get wherever I'm going, and there's no place that I can be by myself to process the emotions, and then I've gotta fly somewhere before I ever get home. And so, like, you're holding all those emotions, and trying to figure out what to do with them in the process. So for me, I walked all around the hospital trying to find somewhere, and then eventually realized I wasn't gonna find anywhere in the hospital, so I just walked out and, like, walked around the campus until I found a corner they were doing construction on, um, and then just found a piece of grass that I could, like, sit off by myself and kind of be away from everybody and process through the emotions. Um, so killed some time feeling bad for myself, processing through that for a minute. And then from there, I sent updates to my physicians, to like my oncologist, as well as my surgeon who did the kidney surgery, who follows my case at the NIH, because I wasn't sure how their systems notify everybody. And so if he needed to be notified about that as well, too, in case this did come back being related to the kidney cancer. And so there was lots of emails, like trying to coordinate all of that. Um, and then I ended up kind of coordinating. The NIH helps pay for part of a hotel whenever I stay there, and so like I went through their reimbursement office to get part of my hotel paid for. And then I originally was going to schedule to take the shuttle to the airport, but I did not want to face everybody in the shuttle, and I didn't want to talk to anybody because I knew if I talked to anybody, I was going to cry. Like, I was still in a state where like I needed to just have some space from it, or it was going to trigger again and I was going to cry. So I decided not to do the shuttle, and I was going to do an Uber instead, which I also was nervous about because I got asked more on that trip if I was an employee than I have any other trip. And like every Uber driver that I had was like, "Oh, are you going to the NIH for a conference?" And so I was like, "No, I'm a cancer patient," and would end up telling them that like, oh, I'm in a good place, and have that whole conversation and share a little bit about my story. Cause whenever they ask, they like get this like, oh crap, like I shouldn't have asked. And they get really uncomfortable. And so I usually diffuse the conversation by like telling them I was in a good place. And I knew I wouldn't be able to have that conversation right now because it didn't feel like I was in a good place. And so I was nervous about catching an Uber, but I figured I'd rather have that conversation with one person than an entire shuttle full of people. So by the time it came time to leave, booked a I booked an Uber to try to leave the NIH, and I booked with plenty of time to get to the airport and to catch my flight. I also have TSA pre-check, so I was like, okay, it'll be smooth sailing. I checked the traffic several times, and it said it was going to take like an hour and 10 minutes or so to get there. But anytime you book an Uber to or from the airport, this didn't happen to me the first year that we were there, but this has happened to me the last 2 times that I've been. I constantly get Ubers and Lyfts canceled because people don't want to go drop off at the NIH because they have like very intense security. It's like kind of similar to going through the airport. Like they have to search your car, and then you have to go through metal detectors and stuff like that. And so I normally can drop a pin to say, like, I'm outside of the security gate. You don't need to go through the security gate to pick me up. I will walk down there. And there's like it's like a 5-minute walk to walk down to the area that they'll pick you up at. But it doesn't let me like send them a message to let them know that, as it's looking for a driver. And so it took me like 20 minutes to even like catch a driver that would pick me up from the NIH. And then it took that driver like 18 minutes to get there. And then when I finally caught the Uber, there was a couple of wrecks on our way to the airport. And so it took us an hour and 45 minutes to get to the airport. And the entire time, like, I felt so bad for that Uber driver because, like, I think he could tell that, like, I was not in a good mood. Like, I'd cried off my makeup, had bloodshot eyes. Um, and so, like, I was just, like, staring out the window and, like, really trying to, like, not look approachable so that he did not engage in conversation because I was not in a place to have conversation. Um, and so, like, the entire time to the airport, like, then he would start asking me, like, "What time's your flight?" And so there was a couple times that, like, I started just, like, tearing up looking out the window, and I was like, "Oh, man, this poor guy thinks that I'm, like, crying because he can't get me to the airport in time," which, I mean, like, was adding to the stress, but was definitely not what it was about in the first place. Um, so that was an intense moment. But eventually we made it to the airport. And then I went to the check-in counter, tried to check my bag, and then it told me I needed to talk to an agent. I talked to an agent and they told me that I missed the bag drop by 10 minutes. I had not missed my flight. My flight still did not take off for like 40 minutes, but I'd missed the bag drop by 10 minutes. And so I could no longer catch my flight. And then that poor gate agent. Um, so of course that triggered me, and tears started flowing from that because I felt like great. Like I didn't even book my flight, so where I was headed is my husband and I celebrate our anniversary in a national park every year, and every year we've had to book around appointments or scans or something. Um, and this one was no exception. We originally were going to go to Big Bend National Park in Texas, but because of when I had to fly to the NIH, like that wasn't going to work. So I got invited to a lab retreat for these two combined labs at Vanderbilt University the week after this procedure. And so instead of flying back home and just having to catch another plane, Brian was going to fly to Nashville so that we could celebrate our anniversary at the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And so I didn't book this. I don't think I did. Yeah, no, I don't. I think Vanderbilt booked this flight for me, and so I didn't book the flight in the first place. And so I was super stressed because I was like, "How do we reschedule this? How is this gonna like? How much is this going to cost?" I knew it was going to be through some like travel program, and so thankfully the gate agent got that taken care of me for me and got me a flight schedule out for the next morning. But I had a rental car that I had paid for and had to figure out how to coordinate and get that rescheduled for the next morning because it was like through Turo, not through just a regular rental car agency. Um, so missed my flight, which of course was just wonderful on top of everything else that made that day just fantastic. Um, and so I grabbed an Uber and went to the closest hotel that I could find. Um, and that woman at the desk was so kind. Um, I really appreciated her. Like I walked in and I'm just like defeated at this point, but like defeated in a comical way, almost of like a, yep, of course. Like everything is just going to continue going wrong. That is just the kind of day we're having today. And so when I walked up to check in, she was like, "How you doing?" And my initial reaction was like, "I'm good. How are you?" And then I like laughed at myself and said, "You know, actually, I'm not good at all. I don't know why I said that, but how are you?" And then she asked me like what was going on. I was like, I just missed my flight. It's so just not having a good day." I was kind of just like laughing at it, just trying to find the humor in it. And so she kind of just talked with me for a little bit while she checked me in. And I didn't tell her anything about like the cancer stuff or any like that I had cancer or that I was just having this bladder polyp thing looked at. Left that out of the conversation. It was just my missed flight that made my bad day. But then as I was like getting ready to go back up to my room, she was like, "I'm really sorry you've had a bad day." And she's like, "You should go take anything out of the pantry." She's like, "Go take anything out of there and it's on me." And so she like offered for me to go like get a snack out of their like pantry area. So I got a couple noodles, which I called my pity noodles. And I absolutely loved them because I hadn't eaten anything all day. I'd had like a granola bar because of everything was so crazy and I can't eat when I'm upset. And so I really appreciated that. Took my pity noodles, went back up to my room, cried for a little bit, and then we're good. After that, it was all processed and the bad day was behind us. So I caught my flight the next morning, and then finally made it to Nashville, got checked in, got picked up my car. And then that is when I headed out. I was driving from Nashville to Asheville, which is where Brian was going to fly in. And I was seeing an old coworker of mine there, which actually does tie back to my cancer stuff because she's amazing. I haven't seen her. I think we figured out it's been 5 years, but we worked remotely with each other for over 8 years. And we'd always meet up for like team meetups and stuff like that. And she had a very big influence on me as like a mentor and kind of just who I am in general today. And so it was amazing to go see her. But she actually is one of the people that when I had my surgery in June of 2021, there was a major blood shortage. They only had 20 units of blood and they needed like 100 on hand in order to go through with my surgery. And we found out the week before surgery it was going to be canceled. It was a whole thing. And Anne was the person who was like calling the blood bank, like getting tabs on how much blood that they need. And then she actually drove 8 hours to go donate blood herself, which is amazing. They say you can't build bonds over like remote and Zoom. Totally, totally not true. So I drove out to see her, and that was about a 5 hour drive. And that actually ended up being perfect for me because how I process anything, like my number one way to like process things is to just go for a really long drive, turn up the music, and kind of just like think and just process through everything. And so I had 5 hours with just me, just driving the road and music to do that with. And so it was gorgeous. It was like peak colors is all the fall leaves were changing. And so it was just such a beautiful drive that about halfway through, the roads were just lined on the sides with just like the most beautiful colors that I had ever seen. And so I decided to pull off at a random exit because I really wanted to get a picture of the trees. They were just stunning. And so I pulled off at an exit and was like, I gotta find somewhere to look at these trees. So I followed, there was a like RV camping sign on the exit sign. So I followed that because I was like, surely there's got to be something pretty by the RV park. And I followed that over by the RV park and it landed me at this like public park before the RV park. And it was like the most gorgeous park I have ever seen. There was like the river that ran in the middle between it. The fall colors were just like stunning all around it. So I took some time and like pulled over and like sat by the river. There was this beautiful bench that was like dedicated to this woman that like said something about like take the time to enjoy the little moments because the little moments will become big moments. Um, it was amazing. And like, so the picture that everybody saw on my social media from like, I was crying 24 hours before my eyes were like all messy to like, I was like genuinely happy and like very grateful that I had that moment, of which I wouldn't have had. I would have been driving through all of that in the dark if I had made my flight the day before. So it was kind of like a nice silver lining and like those are the moments that like really make you stop and appreciate life. And I think that's the biggest shift that's happened for me with cancer is like before I'd really get stuck and caught up on the moment. And I still do sometimes. Like there's definitely times that I have hard times and it takes me a while to process through things. But for the most part, like, and I think a lot of this came from having so many friends that passed very quickly that I thought would have had more time, like recognizing how quickly things can change. And when you don't have control over something, that really the most you can make out of like any day is the moment that you're currently in. And so that didn't make a whole lot of sense. Make the most out of every day. Y'all kind of know what I was trying to say there. Um, And so, like, it's really helped me appreciate those moments of like recognizing, okay, yep, there's something stressful coming up. I know something stressful is coming up. Absolutely nothing I can do about it. Nothing I'm going to do. Worrying is not going to change anything. But what I could do was like really appreciate like how just stunning this park was and like how relaxing that was and the fact that I got to have that moment. And so that's why like my pictures, I look genuinely happy because I was. Um, and then I left that and I met up with Anne, who was my coworker that I had, that I was meeting up with, and I got to hike around Asheville with her a little bit. Then my husband flew in, and then we went and celebrated our anniversary in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. We got to watch the sunrise through there, which was just so beautiful. Um, and After that, I drove straight from we drove straight from celebrating our anniversary back to Nashville, spent the night, and then I drove him to the airport the next morning where I went out to go join the scientific retreat, which was also like one of the best things that I've done all year. Like it was incredible. I was able to share my story with them, which I was super nervous about because even though I share on live and TikTok and do these things, I am not a public speaker. And I actually promised myself I would never do public speaking again several years ago. Um, but it was really nice to be able to do that now because cancer has definitely changed everything in that regard. And it was really nice to be able to share my story with them. And I got to stay for the retreat with them over, it was like a day and a half or so, at this beautiful like cabin area. And I got to like nerd out and ask them lots of questions about science and stuff, which for me was super interesting because I'm like very interested in research and medical science. And I've learned as much as I can on my own. I actually contemplated going back to school for a little while, before realizing that's just probably not a good idea with my diagnosis. And so I've just enjoyed learning what I can on my own, but that means a lot of times like I get like really interested in something and I like get really excited when I learn about it. And I end up like talking at Brian, right? Because he's not learning the same things like when I go down these like nerdy rabbit holes. And so like I'm talking at him about like how cool these things are and how excited I am about them. Because there's nobody in my life that I can talk to about these things. Most people don't just learn this stuff for fun. Um, and so it was kind of nice to be in a place that like these are all researchers. So they were all very excited about this stuff. And it was exciting to be excited about their research and to hear about the things that they were doing. Um, so that was like definitely on my list of coolest things that I've done this year. And so I rolled straight into that. I rolled in from like really bad news straight into like a really great week. And so it was definitely a whirlwind of emotions there. And then like now today sucked again. Like I um I was venting to Brian earlier about like how bad it sucks to have a really complicated case because I'm playing telephone with like 19 different people to try to get things scheduled and it's very complicated and very hard and like I feel like a burden to everybody I'm talking to because my case is so complicated to try to get everybody on the same page. While I'm also simultaneously trying to figure out like how do I book a flight last minute so that somebody can get down here to watch our pets and how do we find hotels and do the whole travel thing. So um, it's definitely a highs and lows kind of thing, but yeah, so that's like a very long story of what all of this is like. But again, obviously that was going to be way too long for a post. The long and short of it is we don't really know what this thing is. We don't think that it's cancer, but I mean, you can't completely ever rule that out until it comes out. And so my surgery is currently planned for November 29th at the end of the month. Um, I'm still trying to find out the frustrating game of telephone that I'm playing that I'm trying to figure out is how long I'm going to stay at the NIH. Because I don't know how long there's a bleeding risk, kind of an immediate bleeding risk from the surgery. And then there's an additional bleeding risk, like 3 to 4 weeks out from the surgery. And then the risk window for that, like opening, closing up, I think is about a month or so. So that's kind of like the main risk window that I'll be watching, but I won't be at the NIH during that entire time. So I'm currently just trying to figure out how long I'm going to be staying everywhere. So that was a lot. I just word vomited at the screen here. So I will scroll back and see if I can find any questions, but we will also move to the question, like the ask me anything thing. And my cat really wants to be let out, so I'm going to let her out. There you go. So feel free to drop any questions in. I do an ask me anything on these things. I used to do these way more often than I do, but you literally can ask anything. I don't care. Even if I like tear up at something, I usually am the most thankful for those questions because I think they're important things to share. So feel free to ask anything and everything and anything. How's your liver? Great question. We haven't checked on it in a while, but that's because it has been doing well. So my last scans were in June of this year. And then because my scans look good, there are a few spots that we have been watching in my liver for a long time that haven't grown. And so they don't think that they're concerning, which is why I'm like no active cancer. And so my last scans were in June. My next set of surveillance scans, this interval was able to be bumped up to 6 months. And so they're supposed to be in December, which is part of why today was so stressful, is because not only am I trying to schedule surgery, but like my scans before weren't scheduled because I was like waiting on emails back and forth that were way too many emails that didn't get responded to. And again, this is like just part of like having dispersed care makes a lot of this happen because it's like it makes my case much more complicated. And so I was waiting to hear back from the NIH on when I could schedule my scans. And then when I finally could schedule my scans, I heard that I couldn't schedule them until February, which meant we had to like slot me in wherever we could find a spot. And so my scans got scheduled for December 15th. But now that means if I have to end up staying a week for the procedure, which is like, usually they want me to stay for like 5 days or so after I have any intervention from like a bleeding risk type standpoint. So if I stay for that period of time, then by the time like I fly back home, get settled in, and then I like immediately fly back, those scans, I wasn't going to be able to have any in-person appointments for those scans. They were going to be literally just scans. So I was literally just going to fly to DC, get those scans, and then fly home, which like, I'm not the biggest fan of when I do scans that way because I really like to meet with my doctors in person. And so that was scheduled for the 15th, but I don't know that I like, I'm sure I'll be recovered by then, but we're mostly recovered by then, but I didn't know that I want to be just like hopping back on a plane back and forth through that. I'm still working and trying to coordinate everything. So a lot of the frustrations are trying to figure out like, how do I do scans? Do I do scans at MD Anderson? Do I do scans at the NIH? And trying to figure out what the best way is to coordinate those. It's way easier for me to get scans at MD Anderson, not just from a travel standpoint, but also just because their scheduling is much, much easier. What did I miss? A lot. We did a lot of talking in here. Let's see. Did you do immunotherapy? No, I did not. The type of cancer that I have, we don't think would be likely to respond to current immunotherapies. And so I was on a TKI, or targeted treatment, for a short period of time. And then we did a very, very large surgery, which took care of most of the disease for me. Somebody asked, so does she have another cancer? I'm lost. I don't know. Hopefully not. But I guess we'll find out. Hopefully everybody so far seems to think that this doesn't look like cancer. So hopefully it won't be cancer and it's just a weird benign thing. yet, but we won't really know for sure till it comes out. The questions, I'm taking questions both from YouTube as well as from TikTok. And I see this is top chat. Is there a live chat? Oh, there we go. Okay, there wasn't any other questions that came from YouTube. Your case is so rare, though. Yes, it is very rare. I think I might have missed your comment before if you said that. Yeah, there's single digit cases of my case. You're the most positive and vibrant person I've ever seen on live. You, Jim. Aw, thank you, Bob. That's very nice. That's very kind. Thank you. Do you have any symptoms of cancer at the moment? No, I do not. So I feel very, very, very fortunate. Not only did I had some symptoms before I got diagnosed, and everybody kind of just thought that those were anxiety. But after, as well as like I used to get these like super, super severe lower abdominal cramps that would like cripple me over in pain. I would get nauseous through them because the pain would get so bad. I'd like cry like over the toilet. It's not a pretty thing. But they would only last for about 30 minutes. And I knew if I could get through that, I'd be fine. Everybody just thought that those were menstrual cramps or endometriosis, which that is not normal. We found out that that was likely the tumor bleeding. And so that was probably like that and my high heart rate were probably the two symptoms that bothered me the most before I had surgery. And then once I had surgery, I occasionally will get a high heart rate still, but it is much, much better than it used to be. I used to not even like, if I was standing in the kitchen unmedicated, my heart rate would be like 145, 160, like just standing, not doing anything. It would just be super high. And now, like, I still sometimes catch myself and I'll look down at my watch and it'll be like 78. And I'll be like, whoa, is that seriously possible? So I don't have those symptoms anymore. And all of those lower abdominal cramps went away after we removed the tumor as well, which is why they think that it might have been bleeding. But I don't have any symptoms from the cancer really left over. And then I also don't really have any major side effects from the treatments that I was on, which I feel very fortunate for because a lot of people that end up in the position that I am in end up having side effects that they end up having to battle afterwards. And I feel extremely fortunate that I currently don't have any of those things to deal with. Can't they biopsy the growth when it's scoped? So they could just go in for a biopsy instead. And for most people, they often do that. But unfortunately, for me, there's a couple reasons we're not doing that. One is due to the location of where it's at. So again, there's some risks with like the location and it being where my kidney drains into my bladder. It's like right where the opening is. And so there's some risks with the biopsy there. I also have a bleeding disorder. And so we don't like to biopsy or do any type of interventions that are going to cause me to bleed without me being pre-medicated. And so if we're going to be like messing around in there, it's better to just take it out. So if we're going to have to go through the whole process of medicating me and everything like that, that's why we will just take it out completely. And then they will send it to figure out what it is after that. Shoot, I just got here and missed the update. Any chance you can repeat it? I will repeat the abbreviated version so I don't keep everybody on here for another hour. But basically, there's a spot in my bladder that we have been watching. We're not 100% sure what it is, hoping that it's not cancerous. It doesn't really look cancerous, but that finally needs to come out because it's in a bad location. It's kind of where my only kidney that I have drains into my bladder. And so there's kind of some risks of blockage from that. Removing also carries some risk too. So I'm having that procedure on November 29th to have that taken out and to get rid of it. Hopefully that'll just be it. Hopefully it'll just be an easy thing. We'll take it out real quickly, uneventful healing process, and I'll get to move back on with my life again. I am not on heart meds now. So I was on like a beta blocker to regulate my heart rate and my blood pressure before I was diagnosed when I had the really rapid heart rate. But after I had surgery, my blood pressure actually got too low. So like if I just am like, so my blood pressure before would be in the like 165 over 110. Like that was the first time we caught it in a doctor's appointment. And now my blood pressure can get to like 125 over like 85 if I'm anxious or something like that. But if you just like catch my blood pressure as I'm just relaxed, it's like 105 over I don't know, like 65, somewhere around there. It's quite low. And right after surgery, it was even lower than that. It was like sometimes in the 80s and 90s over like high 50s. And so my blood pressure was too low to be taking that medication anymore. And so I stopped taking that medication. And then everything kind of just normalized enough that I don't really feel a need to take it anymore. My husband had the same procedure done yesterday for bladder tumor in the same location. Hope he's recovering well. How did the procedure go for him? Yeah, it's a crummy location. Less than ideal. But you were so, oh, thank you. That is very kind of you. I appreciate that. Just joined. How's everything? I will give a little update again in like 15 minutes or so, since I kind of just updated everybody. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Chloe, thinking about you. That's tough. Well, you have I can't pronounce that word, so I'm not going to try, but I know what it is. No, uh, hopefully not. I won't have that too. That's where like they usually, I believe that's where they like puncture your kidney, and let it drain through your kidney that way, or drain out your kidney that way. Hopefully, I won't need that. Especially because I have a bleeding disorder, we don't want to go puncturing my kidney. So the goal is not to have that. Oh, I'm glad that's coming out for him. My catheter that I had after surgery really didn't bother me that much. It was pesky, but I'm sure that that's much worse for men. What made you investigate? What symptoms? I have if you go to my profile there up at the top, I have a link that will take you to my YouTube channel that actually walks through my entire diagnostic history. It took me about a year and a half to get diagnosed. And I walk through step by step all the doctors that I was seeing in that process, as well as all the symptoms that I was feeling at the time. Do you have any strange reactions to the cold weather? I don't. I don't have great heat tolerance. My heart rate actually does get high in the heat, but I don't have any reactions to cold weather. My body actually does a lot better in cold weather. I have those tubes and those suck. Oh man, that's a bummer. I've heard that they're pretty uncomfortable. Do I have to urinate a lot? I do not. I don't really have any symptoms from this thing. I had the bleeding the one time, but I think that that was from this. When they did the scope, they thought that that's what could have been causing the bleeding the first time, but I have not had any bleeding that I've noticed since. So I really don't. The only thing that like maybe I could even slightly feel is like occasionally I'll get a pinch on my left side, like around the area of where I would think it would be. And there's so this little nub. It's like I don't know how to picture it, but it's like on the side. And so like it folds kind of over there on the top. And then like as it drains, it like moves out of the way and all that. And so occasionally it can like get stuck in there for a minute and then it like pops back out. Um, in my brain, it feels like I have no idea if this is actually happening. This is what I imagine it feels like. So occasionally I'll get a little pinch, and sometimes it feels like maybe that's when that is happening. Um, but it's not painful, and it's like a very, very small pinch. And it could be all in my head. I have no idea. But it's only on my left side. So did the polyp grow? Yes, I think that's the question. They, the surgeon did think that it grew. it didn't look that different to me. But obviously I'm not trained to kind of know what to look for. So if it grew, I'm sure if he says it grew, I'm sure it did. And I also do think that it has grown from when we first found it in March. So when we first found it in March, it would like sometimes stand up. It looked like this little nub that would just like flop around back and forth. And then now it's kind of like permanently like folded over. And so there to me is a definite difference from March. I don't know if I would have noticed that big of a difference from the last scope, but the surgeon did. So yes, it did grow. The cancer did not come back, we don't think. It'd be pretty unlikely for this thing in my bladder to be metastatic disease from my kidney cancer that I had. Not impossible, but it'd be very, very unlikely. And so it'd actually be more likely for this thing to be bladder cancer than it would be for it to be kidney cancer. But we're hoping that it's just not any type of cancer. So fingers crossed for that one. Did they do fish? Yes, they did. Twice or 3 times, I believe. Not on the bladder thing, 'cause that hasn't come out yet, but on my initial tumor they did. When is the surgery? It's November 29th. Would you have any symptoms if it was bladder cancer? I think there's some people that don't have symptoms from bladder cancer, especially early stage bladder cancer. But the symptoms from bladder cancer from Dr. Google were like blood in your urine, as well as like pain when urinating, I think. Maybe. I don't know. It's been a minute since I looked those up, but blood in your urine was one of them. And I do have microscopic blood in my urine that's caught occasionally when I ever do a urinalysis. But that's been caught several times, and I don't know if it's related or not. But they call it gross blood when you can like actually see the blood in your urine. I had that one time back in March, but I haven't had that since. And that is more commonly a symptom, I believe, of bladder cancer. It's like being able to actually see blood. All right, I will go until about 8 more minutes. Will be an hour and a half on live here. So feel free to drop any questions, and I'm happy to answer anything. Yeah. I love when people ask questions because otherwise I just like stare at the screen and get all awkward. So, am I still writing? That's a great question. And I don't know where this is why I'm also stressed with all of this happening. I don't know where I'm going to find the time to finish this stuff. So I just looked at the calendar. I finished writing. My book got picked up by a publisher. Thank goodness. And we are aiming to publish in December of 2024 currently, which would be the 4-year anniversary of my surgery. Or not my surgery, of my diagnosis. But I have until January 1st to get through all of the edits on my book. And so I received the editor's notes, comments back, and then I went through and kind of did all the line edit changes. And now I'm going through to add in the additional context and kind of additional information that she was looking to have in the book. So I'm currently going through that process, and I have a deadline of January 1st to get all of that back. So hopefully I can figure that out. I think I can get it through. That's honestly what I'm going to do when I wrap up from this here is start doing that. So that is next steps. I had a coffee here this entire time and just realized that I'm pretty sure it's cold now. Yeah. Cold coffee is a thing, right? It's cold brew now. What's your favorite animal? Oh, probably otters. Otters are adorable. Yeah, I love otters. Other than that, probably I would say dogs. I do love our cats a lot, but I'm definitely a dog person. Oh yeah, how are you doing? Coffee at night won't keep you up. Not really. Coffee doesn't really seem to affect me a whole lot, but I also am not super great at going to bed early. So I will probably be up till at least midnight anyways. Did you know that river otters have over 200,000 hairs per square inch on their body? I did not know that. That's a pretty cool fun fact. Where'd you learn that fact? Do I need to Google it before I repeat it back to somebody? Because I absolutely am going to share that fun fact with somebody. Oh, that's what I forgot I was going to do tonight. I went out earlier because I was going to go to the store. Because for every surgery that I end up having, or anytime like I'm inpatient, I make this little like candy box that has candy and dad jokes on it for my team. I have the candy because it's left over from Halloween because we did not get a lot of trick or treaters. But I forgot to get the little ribbons. But that reminded me because it's like a little fun fact. I usually do dad jokes, but yeah. Thank you so much, Valerie. I appreciate that. I'm a tour guide at the zoo. Oh, that's awesome. You have all the best animal facts, I bet then. Did you see Miss America? She had to go get a kidney removed, 16-centimeter mass. No, I did not. Was that like just recent of Miss America? I wonder what kind of kidney cancer she had. That's young. How are your kidneys? They're doing good. I had a bit of a scare there for a minute because my kidney function dipped a little bit and didn't know why. And then went back up, and then I don't know where it's at currently. I think I was way overhydrated for my last set of labs, and I kind of think that inflated my numbers a little bit more. And with the inflated numbers, my kidney function had dropped a little bit, which is also part of why I do think it's probably time to get this thing out in case that it could cause any problems. Regina Stock, I'll have to go look that up. I hope she's doing okay and her surgery went smoothly. That's bigger than the tumor that I had. Mine was 12 centimeters. Yes, it would be a great Christmas present for it to be benign. I would love that. Let's all manifest that happening. That would be grand. But like really benign. Okay. Because this thing was supposed to be benign too. This is supposed to be an oncocytoma, my kidney tumor. I mean, it is an oncocytoma, but oncocytomas are normally benign, but mine spread. We want this bladder thing to like really be benign and for reals. I don't know what that means. Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. Thank you. I'm sending all of the same right back to you from one survivor to another. Before I got diagnosed, I'm sure I will do this before surgery. I'm that person that randomly sings around the house. And every time I get worked up about these things, it's benign, everything's fine. That just becomes my like phrase that I sing constantly. So that'll be going on in my head as I wait for this thing to come back. No, we don't think that it spread. Hopefully, we don't know. I live in a world of unknowns constantly. So we don't really know for sure until we get it out. But we think it's very, very unlikely that this is spread from the kidney cancer. Like I already had bad luck that my tumor spread in the first place. This would be really bad. Like, oh, thank you. That was an adorable little ghost thing on TikTok. This would be like it'd be very rare, even more rare for this to be spread. The more likely scenario is that would be that this would be bladder cancer, but it doesn't look like bladder cancer typically looks like either. So hopefully this is just benign and it's polyp or like some weird overgrowth of my bladder or something. Yeah, we don't really know what it is and won't know until it comes out. So there's no saying for sure, but hopefully it's just nothing to worry about and it's benign. How'd you paint these cubes behind you? I didn't. I wish I was that talented. I am not. I actually was going to replace these because I'm getting sick of them. Everything looks so gray and washed out. So I think I'm gonna get like there was like an astronaut one or like a really pretty landscape. I think I'm gonna end up putting they're supposed to be soundboards because I have a podcast, Oncology Unscripted, which we actually released a new video today. So folks on YouTube, if you go to Oncology Unscripted, we actually recorded my podcast is myself and another patient advocate. She had a sarcoma and a radiation oncologist. And so we just finished a series going through radiation oncology. I did not know really anything about radiation. And so learned a whole lot through our entire podcast series. But the last episode of the podcast, we just posted on YouTube, and it's Matt or Dr. Sprecher, who was Julie's radiation oncologist. And we actually got Julie's plan, like the mapping plan that they use to map out the radiation. And so Matt walks through the entire plan of like how he decided on what treatment to do for the radiation, how it was all mapped out to kill a tumor. And he explains all of that. It was a great, great podcast. And it's all visual. You can see how it works. It's like the behind the scenes of how proton therapy works and what a plan looks like. And so if you want to check that out, Oncology Unscripted, again, is what it is. And we just posted our first video today. Did I play the piano? I did play the piano when I was a kid, but not a very long time. Podcasts are fun. I love podcasts. All right. So I just hit an hour and a half here, and I just talked about all the fact that I have a deadline to finish writing my book or my edits by January 1st. So I've got to hop off here. If you want to support my book and be notified when it's released, having like a group of pre-sales before your book really helps it do really well once it is released. And I'm donating 100% of my proceeds from the book to research. So if you want to support those efforts, feel free to click the link in my bio or to go to katiekickscancer.com. And you can enter your email address. I don't send spam. This list is literally just to be notified when the book comes out. So I don't send like newsletters or those kinds of things. Really, it's just to be notified when the book comes out. So if you want to sign up there, sign-ups always help me and mean a lot. But thank you all for joining and for all the support that y'all have shown me. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in any of my videos. And I will answer any questions that way as well. So thank you all, and I hope you all have a great night.